It's a tremendous honor and a privilege to introduce Aryeh, a very dear and close friend for many years. Here we are in Beit Vegan in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem. And Aryeh, you did mention to me the most amazing, it's just an incredible story of your great-grandfather, Aryeh Vecht, who was born in Holland. And what an inspirational story. So Aryeh, this is a picture of your great-grandfather from Alyeh Street in Cape Town. He had a very illustrious career and an amazing journey through life. But if you could mention to our listeners an insight into your very, very special great-grandfather.
Okay, my great-grandfather Aron Vecht was a Dutchman who lived in Amsterdam most of his life, but was born in Aalborg. And the origins of the family actually were not Dutch, they were from Portugal. They were expelled from Portugal at the time of the expulsion, and around the 1700s they became Ashkenazi. They intermarried with the Ashkenazi community and they became Ashkenazi. But the origins are Sephardi for sure. The name of the family was Mendes de la Costa, if I'm not mistaken. Now Aron was a businessman, a frum businessman. He was religious and used to travel throughout the world. He was in the meat refrigeration business, and he traveled with his 11 children with a boat which he owned and a shochet, and he himself learned shchita, so he shouldn't have a problem with kashrus. And as you see in the picture, he ended up once or twice, in fact, in South Africa. And my grandmother actually wrote an autobiography, which I have, I should show it to you. And she recalls when she was once in South Africa, they were shopping in the shuk, and she had such a shock because they were buying fruits and vegetables, and she said, give me 2 pennies worth or whatever it is, don't throw in too many watermelons. For 2 cents, they had, don't throw in too many watermelons.
It's incredible.
So they had such an abundance there, so she was quite astounded by that. Anyway, he was a personal friend of Israel Zangwill, who was a very famous Jewish author at the turn of the century, friend of Herzl, and they were very, very close. They collaborated on various projects and publications which Zangwill wrote, and my great-grandfather was the founder of the Jewish Standard in London, which was the frum organ of the community. And he used to have a weekly column there called Moror and Charoses, which was probably a parody on the famous column by George Sims, Mustard and Cress, which was written by Sims, the well-known journalist. Zangwill was very witty, as all the Vechts are, very, very witty and clever, and he was a natural, of course, contributor to the Jewish Standard. There's another very amusing anecdote with Vecht and his association with Zangwill. When Vecht asked Zangwill whether he was to call his 4th newly born daughter Dina or Diana, was my grandmother, to which Zangwill promptly replied, 4th daughter, call her Dayenu. But he called her Dina. He was a very striking and colorful personality in his own right. He was a man of buccaneering vitality whose adventures earned him the title of the Jewish Globetrotter. Born in Elburg on the river Vecht in Holland, from which the family name is derived, some 100 years ago, this is written in 1955, I believe, Vecht was never too busy to apply himself to the futuring of the cause of Jewish orthodoxy and Zionism. He was a big Asken. He was very involved with the Jewish community and Zionism, but a frum Zionist. He was one of the founders of Chovevei Tzion, the association, and when later Herzl launched the Zionist movement, he became one of the most ardent followers. He subscribed to the Zionist funds and attended some of the Zionist congresses in Basel. It is not surprising that his name figures 6th in the Golden Book, Sefer HaZahav, of the Jewish National Fund, which is now in the Jewish Agency. It used to be just across the road in Har Herzl. Sokolow, the following of his name follows that of Herzl, Wolfson, and Sokolow. And they define him as a man of striking individuality and an ardent Jewish nationalist. His personal life was as interesting as his incursions into public life. From his earliest youth, he was seized with Wanderlust. You know what Wanderlust is? The love of traveling. It's a German word, Wanderlust. He was never to outgrow this passion for travel. He traveled practically all over the world, and always with his entire family, including at first 7 children, and afterwards even more. His journeyings took him to Australia and New Zealand, then at the invitation of Cecil Rhodes to South Africa, and again to Argentina and back to London. The excuse for globetrotting was, of course, business. He was connected with the meat refrigeration or meat preservation business, of which he was a pioneer. He was a strictly Orthodox Jew, despite the discomforts of travel. Vecht and his family were able to observe the Jewish dietary laws thanks to his training as a shochet in his youth in Holland. There are some say that he sat shiva for Herzl when Herzl went off the road because he was whatever. My grandfather was so upset and he sat shiva for him, but I don't know if that's just a tale, if it's true or not. There are some who still remember the tall figure with his long patriarchal beard and his striking presence. His ambition was to settle ultimately as a farmer in Palestine, but for various family reasons he was unable to realize this hope, and he was destined and finally settled in Antwerp. However, I know why, because of the diamonds, that's why. However, he was determined not to enjoy his leisure long. He died in 1908 at the early age of 54. However, what he failed to accomplish in his adventurous life, he was to achieve in death. In accordance with his expressed wishes, his remains were transferred to Israel. He's buried in the the most ancient, oldest cemetery in Tel Aviv, the Trumpeldor Cemetery, right next to Bialik, actually. Next to Bialik, yeah. So that was my great-grandfather, Aron Vecht. Here you have a picture of him with my grandmother and aunts and uncles in London, when they lived in London. That's him, and that's my grandmother.
And this is the descendants?
Yeah. His children.
His children.
His children.
And Aron, on this, the picture of Aron, of your great-grandfather,
yes.
This was the one in South Africa,
Exactly. Yes, he
from
was
Aryeh Street. So he was in the Boer War.
He was in the Boer War, captain in the Boer War. He fought in the Boer War.
And he fought on the part of the Boers?
On the Boers, yeah. I believe so. He was Dutch.
Oh, so that must have been difficult because he was invited by Cecil Rhodes.
Maybe that was later.
But this is...
Perhaps that was later. After he fought for them, and Cecil Rhodes asked him to come down again, because that's the second time he came down.
So this is a very famous picture that was taken in Aryeh Street in Cape Town. And we can actually see here from Aryeh Street. It's actually quite amazing. And he looks like a Boer general. Mm-hmm. What an amazing story.
Yeah.
And what happened with the diamonds? How did they get involved in diamonds?
Cecil Rhodes offered him to come down, and in return he gave him 2 absolutely free. The diamonds were just taking off then at that period. He offered him 2 diamond mines, which he took over and started developing them. But he did not want to stay in South Africa, so he gave them to my grandfather and my great uncle, the 2 brothers, on condition that they marry his 2 daughters, my grandmother and an aunt of mine, right here. This is my grandmother.
And that's exactly what happened.
That's exactly what happened.
And here's a picture.
They developed the business and prospered and lived most of their lives, of course, in Antwerp until the Nazis came and they had to run away to New York, and they established the company H&M Freudman. That's the name of my mother's name, maiden name. They opened up a company in New York, and my father was also a partner there in 1946, 1945.
And Aryeh, can you just tell our listeners, because I remember you mentioning to me what happened with the diamonds when the Nazis, when they invaded Holland.
Well, that's the story of how they escaped from Antwerp, you mean?
If we could just...
Will you do that? He said,
It's so unbelievable.
My father was Austrian, and he saw the Anschluss. He saw the Anschluss when Hitler came into Austria, and he saw the terrible situation of the Jews that they had.
He was actually from Klagenfurt in the south.
Originally from Klagenfurt, but he grew up. He left Klagenfurt at the age of 15, 16, I'm not sure, and later grew up went to school in Vienna. And he saw the Anschluss, and he saw the terrible situation of the Jews there after the Nazis came there. And within days, he got all the certificates and papers needed, and he ran away from Vienna trying to save his family. Did not succeed. His father, my grandfather, died in Buchenwald, and my grandmother died in Vienna because she was so terribly upset when she heard about her husband who was beaten to death by the Nazis. That was my grandfather. And he ran away to Brussels. He was a furrier, my father. The fur business was a good business in Austria. And he opened up a firm in Brussels, a fur business in Brussels, and went on holiday once to Nice. Nice was a very beautiful city, of course, still is. And there was one kosher restaurant, which not too long ago was still in existence, Poznansky. And he went for lunch there, and in walks in my mother with her family. They were also on holiday there. He noticed my mother, and he asked to be introduced to her. And about 3 months later, they were married.
Wow.
But they did not go back. They did not live in Antwerp. They lived in Brussels. He wanted the 60 kilometers of peace, he used to call that, between him and his father-in-law. But and he didn't want to go into the diamond business. He kept his fur business. And then on May 1st, 1940, when Hitler came to the doors of Holland, my father called up my grandfather, because Holland and Antwerp are like Tel Aviv, New York, Tel Aviv, Yerushalayim. It's a matter of hours. And the Dutch didn't even protest. They just raised their hands and let the Nazis walk through. So
there was very little resistance.
Not at all.
Virtually none.
So my father's, Baruch Hashem, HaChacham Anoret HaNolad, he saw what's going to happen. He picked up a phone and said to my grandfather, Pa, get yourself together, we're leaving today. Not tomorrow, today we're leaving. My grandfather said, what, are you crazy? Nothing's going to happen. It's a Meshugas. We're leaving today. Get your diamonds together. Get the family together. And my father got petrol and 3 big cars like the taxis in London. Took the whole family, uncles and aunts, whoever wanted to come along. Unfortunately, this uncle did not want to come, and he died in Auschwitz. There were a few of them, like 2 or 3 of them, that did not want to come. They didn't believe in it, and they were taken away to Auschwitz. Anyway, my father, mother, uncles, aunts, grandfather, and grandmother were in these cars, traveled towards France. France was still free. Unfortunately, in the skies, you saw the Luftwaffe already bombing the Jews and all the refugees running away from Belgium. And they were traveling in carts and horses. It was very, very pathetic. Thank God my parents and grandparents had the funds, and they had cars, so they succeeded to get to the south of France, which was still free. And then Hitler still kept on coming down south, so my father decided, well, let's go. They went to Portugal, which was the last neutral country. Portugal stayed neutral. When my father arrived in Portugal, they arrested him because he was an enemy alien. And so my grandfather, who had money, gave under the table $10,000 to the judge.
Wow.
And in 3 hours, my father was out. The next morning, they were on the last boat to New York, from Portugal to New York.
The very last boat.
The very last boat, which made it, because
There
afterwards
were U-boats.
the U-boats were bombing all the transportation that were on the seas. No one could get through. But this boat was the last boat that managed to get through to New York, and they were on it. They came to New York and they established the diamond firm H&M Freudman, and I was born a few years later in 1946. And that's the story of how my parents escaped to United States. You want to ask a question, which is a very good question. How did they get into America? That was the biggest nest. I told you the story.
But for our listeners, it's...
How did they get to America? Because they were
The
not
doors were
American.
closed, they were...
America did not allow people to come in.
We have the story of the St. Louis that was sent back.
Exactly. So this is the biggest nest. My great-grandfather, from my mother's side, was a Talmid Chacham, a Talmid of the Shevet Sofer. Yasmicha from him, right here. And he decided, they lived in Antwerp, and he decided to try to go to America for a few years, to try his luck there financially. Maybe he could make a few more dollars. They went to Philadelphia. They lived in Philadelphia for 3 years. And they left after 3 years because my great-grandfather said, this is no place to raise children. It's not a religious atmosphere, so they went back to Europe. In the meanwhile, my grandfather was born. He was an American. And because of that, he gave the citizenship to my mother by naturalization. So she was allowed into, and she married my father was, even though he was an enemy alien, because that was for Europe. But in America, he was considered American because he was married to a naturalized American. And that's how they got into America. That's another nest.
It's like a real miracle. Incredible miracle.
Yeah. Anyway, that's the story, and I hope you enjoyed it. It's a true story. And that's it. Thank you very much.
I think it must be one of the very few religious. He was in the Boer War, one of the very few Orthodox religious fighters in the Boer War.
I'd imagine so.
And it's amazing that he volunteered to fight in the Boer War.
I'd imagine so. Who?
Because there you had the Afrikaners against the British.
Right.
That's absolutely incredible. And we'll just have a look at, I think it's the most incredible picture. And this is, you can see how religious your grandfather was, your great-grandfather.
Yeah.
And here's a picture, again, the picture that was taken in Adley Street.
Yeah.
Aryeh, thank you very, very much. You must be very proud of, it's a most incredible story. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.